This is Watu Kobesa, and now we're going to look at the theme of a bad bishop as a good defender. Okay, this is a very powerful positional method because what happens is that if you can be able to assess properly how to change the structure and allow yourself to have a bad piece by definition. So let's look at the definition of a bad bishop. A bad bishop is a bishop that has pawns, static pawns that cannot move, that cannot change their position on the same color as itself. But now, becomes now, this is now a very nice idea, because in many cases, it is said that a bad piece, a bad defender, a bad bishop can actually be a very good defender of pawns. So we are going to look at this example here, you know, and it's quite a difficult concept to understand, and it already is, you know, positionally it's the next level. It's not easy to see players, maybe I will say under the rating of 2000, who are able to understand this concept, and but it's useful to learn and understand this. Okay, so as usual, in many cases we're going to look at a classical game because it's slightly simpler, and then we're going to move on and look at more complex examples from modern games. Okay, so the first game we're going to look at is a game between Frank Marshall against Akiba Rubinstein. Akiba Rubinstein is actually one of my favorite players. He was never world champion, but it's clear that he was one of the strongest players in the world. You know, he's one of the players who actually should have been world champion, and he was just unlucky that he never got the chance to actually challenge for the world championship. But he won many very strong tournaments then, and he had a very good score against all the world champions. And generally, it is thought that maybe there was a moment where he was clearly the strongest player in the world, you know, for many years. Maybe, I'm not 100% sure, but probably around 1907 to 1911, 1912, maybe around there. Maybe he was amongst the very strongest players, or maybe later, I don't know. But he definitely was, there was a moment when he was definitely the strongest player in the world. And yeah, if you look at his games, actually, he used to play with such clarity that it's sometimes difficult to imagine how many modern players would have been playing without Rubinstein's influence. Anyway, we look at this game. He played this game against Frank Marshall in Karlsbad in 1907. Let's go into the game. So Marshall played d4, and he played d5, c4, e6, knight c3, c5. This is the so-called Tarrasch defense of the Queen's Gambit. It's named after another very strong player, Siegbert Tarrasch. Okay. So Black immediately attacks the white center. And white has the option of immediately creating a weak pawn in Black's position. But okay, for that, c takes d5, e takes d5, and we immediately see here that d5 is weak. But it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning, rather. Because you see, when you have a weak pawn, let us go into the definition of why it's a weak pawn. It's a weak pawn because there's no other pawn that can defend it, right? So it means If a pawn is weak, isolated, there are two files that are open because there are no pawns there. So it immediately means you've got the possibility of using your pieces freely. So that's another issue, is that when you have an isolated pawn, you can use your pieces freely. But okay, Marshall plays knight f3, knight c6, bishop g5. Okay, today players play g3 here. G3 is thought of as white's most solid move, to play bishop g2 and to point the bishop at d5. Okay, that's okay. Bishop g5, bishop e7, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, e3. And here in this position, Rubinstein plays, for me, it's quite an amazing move, because he plays here c takes d4. C takes d4, it looks like a bad move, and I'll tell you why. If you're using your eyes, you think, okay, well, he takes on d4, white takes with the knight, and white immediately has got access to the square. White will play queen d2, rook d1, and just pile the pressure on that pawn. But things are not as easy as all that. He castles, and now white plays the move bishop e2. Okay, what I'm going to do, just to illustrate how strong Rubinstein was, we are going to I'm just going to move the black king backwards and forwards, just so that I can illustrate how easily white can improve his position to a point where black will not be able to defend. So for an example, let's say black plays here king h8, white castles. Like, I'm not going to do anything with black. I just want us to focus on white. So white will play probably a move like bishop f3, pointing at the pawn, and play the move knight e2, play the move maybe queen b3, rook d1, and knight f4, something like this. Yeah, maybe even double the rooks first. Yeah, let's double the rooks first just to show you. So let's say rook d2 maybe, king here, double the rooks, and knight f4. So this would be like the ideal setup by white. Look at all of white's pieces. All of white's pieces except the king are taking this poor pawn on d5. And the pawn will fall, and afterwards you're just going to lose without a fight. So we really have to go back to this position after bishop e2 and say, well, what is Rubinstein going for? And the point is that Rubinstein wants to play with this piece against the bad bishop as a good defender. Let's see what he plays. He plays queen b6. It's a good move. So Marshall played knight b3, but let's ask ourselves the question, what happens if Marshall castles? And now we will see. He will play knight takes d4. And if Marshall takes back, okay, I'm not looking at the fact that the pawn on b2 is hanging, but let us look at this position. We see that both sides have got weak pawns, isolated pawns. Black has got an isolated pawn on d5. White has got an isolated pawn on d4. But now let's say, what is the difference between these two pawns? Okay, the pawn on d5 has got what we shall call a natural defender, being this bishop. It's a natural defender of the pawn on d5. Let me explain that. For you to understand why I'm saying that the bishop on c8 is a natural defender of the pawn on d5, you have to think of it this way. The pieces that can attack d5 are either worth 3 points or more. So d5 can be attacked by the knight, which is worth 3 points, by the bishop, or by the queen, 9 points, or the rook, which is worth 5 points. Black will defend with the bishop. Okay? But the white pawn on d4 doesn't have a natural defender. You see, because if the knight is to defend this, so let me make an example. This pawn is attacked by the knight, so I can play bishop e6. The pawn is attacked by a piece worth 3 points, is defended by a piece worth 3 points, right? Now let us make another example here. I move the knight to c6. Now, this pawn is attacked by a piece worth 3 points, but it's going to have to be defended by a piece worth 9 or 5 points. If this knight wants to defend this pawn, the knight has to go to an awkward position in e2. So do you see that black is able to defend this pawn by natural means? A natural defender. The bishop just goes to e6. It's a natural move. You know, black is not, getting into an awkward position to defend this pawn. But white would have to get to an awkward position to defend his pawn. So do you see what is the difference? The difference is that the bad bishop becomes a good defender of weak pawns. So that is the idea that Rubinstein has when he plays the move queen b6. It explains why, for example, Marshall didn't play here queen d2 to defend b2, because it would allow knight takes d4. He plays the move knight b3, you see, not to allow the exchange. But now Rubinstein has factored this move in, and the fact is that the king is still in the center. So Rubinstein plays the move d4. Now, it is said that the theory is such that when you have an isolated pawn in the center, how you defend and actually take the advantage is if you can push the pawn and then win the pawn back, because you still keep your space, and this time you don't have any weaknesses anymore. Yeah. So Marshall takes, he takes d4, rook d8. Yeah, it's easy to see that he's not able to defend this pawn on d4. Knight is also coming to f5. So he pushes it, knight b4, and now we cannot defend it. Bishop f3, he's in a pin, knight takes d5, bishop takes, and now bishop e6. Castles, knight takes d5. Right. So the dust has settled, the pawns have become, it's actually a symmetrical position. 2 pawns on the queen side for each side, 3 pawns on the king side for each side. But the problem is that white is not fully developed. The queen on d1 is in some kind of awkward position, because opposite the queen is that rook on d8, x-ray to the queen. The knight on b3 is also not on its natural position, because remember, a knight always wants to control 8 squares. Now, if you look at the knight on b3 and we ask how many squares this guy is controlling, the poor guy is controlling, oopsie, the poor guy controls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares only. Yeah, he's missing 2 squares that he's not controlling. So we can safely say that he's not happy. The knight on b3 is not in a very good position. So, okay, Marshall plays knight a4, queen b4, attacking the knight, queen d4, and now Rubinstein plays a very strong move, a very positional move, very strong. These are the type of moves that when your technique becomes better, you'll be able to play naturally. We don't want any of these knights to get back into the game. What does that mean? We don't want the knight to go to c5, where it attacks our bishop and attacks b7. So that is why b6 is played. Notice that this knight is on such a beautiful outpost on d5. So h3, now we take, and bishop d7. There is nowhere that the knight can move to without wrecking the structure. b3 is obviously a horrible move because we would take. So he plays knight c3. It's exchanged, and now look at this position. All of a sudden, it is white who's got 2 weak pawns, and more importantly is that this pawn is weak on a half-open file. So he's in big trouble here. And I'm just going to go very quickly because Rubinstein, technique-wise, just brings the point home here with just simple technique, pushing the pawn and being able to queen, and Marshall cannot really stop it. He loses a piece, and he could have resigned here, but okay, he plays on a little bit, and resigns in this position. So a very, very nice game, but more importantly, the idea. Now we see a new idea, which is, yes, I have a bad bishop, but this bad bishop is a good and natural defender of a weak pawn. The next game which we're going to look at, on the same theme of a bad bishop being a good defender of a weak pawn, is a game between Samuel Reshevsky against Bobby Fischer. This was played in 1963 in the US Championship. And we're going to zoom very quickly past the opening because I want us to reach the critical position pretty quickly. C4, C5, knight f6, knight c6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e3, d5. Normal moves are taking the center. C takes d5, e takes d5, bishop e2, bishop d6. Castles, castles, knight f3, bishop g4. And around here, yeah, Reshevsky starts to play maybe not so strong. Maybe he should just play b3. I'm not sure why he played g3, doesn't matter. So Fischer plays bishop b4 and bishop d2, knight e4. He sees some forced variation that will lead to this position. This position is the one that we want to discuss. And the question is, why does Fischer go into this position? What do I mean? Well, see, he's got a weak pawn on d5. And not only that, but he's got a bishop, a white squared bishop. So it means that he's got a weak pawn and a bad bishop. Right? But let's look, if you only look at these two factors, you will say, okay, black has got a bad position. But you have to factor in everything, no? All the factors, all the other issues in the position that will be important. Well, white also has a weak pawn on a3, two weak pawns, and c3. And very important is the fact that the pawn on c3, again, is a weak pawn, and it just so happened to be based on this half-open c file. So it means that we are expecting a black to be able to harass this c3 pawn with the rook. So now immediately when we have a position like this, you need to make a plan. Now when you make a plan in terms of where my pieces have to go, what you do is you just sort of visualize where each piece has to be. So for an example, we start, where should the rook be? The rook must obviously be on c8 because it's an open file. Where must this bishop be? Well, this bishop must obviously be on e6 because it will defend d5. Where must this knight be? That's an important question. The knight would want to attack this pawn. If you put this knight on c4, it blocks the rook. So the knight must go to e4 here. It doesn't matter how the knight is going to get to e4. Once we establish that these three pieces have to go there, the rook must go to c8, the bishop must go to e6, and the knight must go to e4. Then comes the when and the how, and the calculation of variations comes after that. So then you will see the knight can go to a5, to b7, to d6, and then to e5, for an example, which it will do in the game, by the way. So let us see how the game continues. So that is why Fischer goes into this position, because he's got a natural defender. So rook c8, rook b1, b6, rook b5, and now queen e7. So he offers Reshevsky the d5 pawn for the a3 pawn. Of course, Reshevsky cannot accept this, because if Reshevsky takes the d5 pawn but loses the a3 pawn, what does it mean? It means then that would be ridiculous, because Fischer has no weakness at all, but Reshevsky is still stuck with this weak pawn on c3. Yeah, that would be very bad technique, of course. So, which explains in this position why Reshevsky, of course, plays a4. But now comes another interesting part about weaknesses. When you push a weak pawn, the weak pawn goes closer to the opponent and actually becomes slightly weaker. Yeah, whenever you push weaknesses, you have to be careful because they become weaker because it becomes easier for the opponent to attack them because they are closer to the opponent. Bishop e6. Now look at that bishop. Very natural piece. We have here in this position at the moment 14 points attacking the pawn, yeah, the rook and the queen, defended by 3. So plays queen a1, queen f6, king g2, and now the knight makes its way to e4. Knight a5, knight b7. Of course, we're not worried about knight takes b7 because if knight takes, knight takes e6. If knight takes e6, we take f takes e6. Now we don't have any weakness and we have opened the f file and the opponent is left with those weaknesses. Yeah, this would only be very good for us. So of course, Reshevsky is not going to play such a move. Rook b4, knight d6, a5, knight e4. All the pieces are now. It is exactly that point I was making, that you create a weakness so that you force the opponent to defend the weakness, and as they defend the weakness, you now move your pieces over to the king, which is what Fischer is doing now. All the pieces are now slowly moving on towards the king. Look at White's queen, sad queen on a1. Yeah, being forced to defend a pawn. Takes. He cannot play rook takes b6, of course, because of bishop h3 check. Yeah, and queen takes b6. So queen b2. Okay, then I'm just going to go quickly because our theme was actually about a bad piece being a good defender. So I'm just going to go through now, and you can watch how the game ended. But you will notice, obviously, that the white king, at the end of all that, at the end of all those exchanges, where white gets rid of the 2 weaknesses and black still has a weakness, but the problem now is what? The king is very weak. The knight has to defend against queen f3, and the back rank is very weak. So this is actually a very big advantage for black. And what Fischer is going to do now is going to continuously harass the white king. You see, so queen e5, for an example, the threat is what? To play queen e4, to threaten mate. So he must play rook e1. Why? So that he has f3. You see? Because now if queen e4, then he can play f3, no? And e3 is defended, you see? But now what does it mean? The rook is not happy. Why is the rook not happy? Because the rook is not on an open file. So now Fischer plays h5. Very good move. Yeah? He is opening his back rank, and at the same time, h5 means that he can play h4 and weaken the king side further. White has no counterplay here. White is in big trouble. Few pieces on the board, but no counterplay. Queen b1 and queen c2, check. Rook c8. The threat is now mate on the back rank. The threat is queen c1. Yeah. Knight c3. Rook takes c3. Check. He must play this check, unfortunately, because the rook is hanging. Yeah. Check. Rook c8. So we have this position, and here he can resign. Yeah. He just plays on because. Yeah, I guess you know, when you play chess, probably time trouble and the momentum. He's just playing on, but he can resign here in this position. No chance. Yeah. So the king is hunted, and yeah, most probably there's going to be either a checkmate or the queen is going to be lost. Yeah, maybe, for example, if king. Yes, if king wanted to be mate, check and mate, yeah? King d2, but you can calculate on your own, and it's already over here. So, but more importantly was the theme, you know, which is a bad defender, bad by definition, that the pawns are on the same squares as the bishop, can be a very good defender of the weak pawn, yeah? Okay. Right, so still on our topic of a bad bishop being a good defender, we're going to look at another game. This game was played by between Littlewood against Vasily Smyslov, who was world champion. And This was played in 1981 in Hastings. Let us see what happened. D4, D5, C4, C6. Again, we're going to go pretty quickly past the opening because it's not our main concern now. We're looking at the middle game position now. So it was a Slav variation. In another video, I explained what the idea is with the Slav to release the bishop, to take on C4 and play B5 and so on. E6, E3, knight D7, A3. And in this position, Smyslov finds a very interesting move. Yeah, Smyslov, whenever he played against players he viewed to be weaker than him, he liked very much, when you look at his games, he liked very much to get out of theory and to play original positions because he always thought that that gave his opponents more chances of going wrong. Yeah. So he plays G6, Bishop G7, castles, B4. There's nothing wrong with this move, B4. Why is B4 a good move? Okay, let us go back to this position now. I think this is important, an important position for us to discuss from a positional point of view. Because now we need to start opening our eyes positionally to see, what is going on here. What is the opponent going to play? What is white going to play? Right, let's start. The most important thing is the pawn. So, black pawns that are important are these pawns here. These are the most important pawns for black. And for white, these are the most important pawns. These are the central pawns. Now, the most important pawns amongst those pawns are obviously the ones on the 4th and 5th rank. So D4 is the most important pawn by white. D5 is the most important pawn by black. Good. So what does that mean? It means that white will try to put more pressure on this pawn. So white wants to play the move E4 when white is ready. Why am I saying when white is ready? Because you have to say to yourself, well, what happens after the move E4? What do you think? Well, after the move E4, positionally speaking, D4 becomes weak. Because when white plays E4, there's no pawn that can protect D4 anymore. Okay? But we are able to weaken. Because if sometimes, Fischer once said, in order to get squares, you have to give squares. But sometimes in order to attack, you have to create some weaknesses. You have to compromise. You have to compromise. You cannot play without creating weaknesses and yet still expect to win the game. Not possible. There always is an element of risk, but a calculated risk. You have to see what is it that I'm risking, when do I want to risk. So E4 is a move that maybe white wants to play, but white has to get ready to play the move E4. Ready meaning, look, both rooks are not yet in the game. That's 10 points. The queen is not yet in the game. That's 19 points. The bishop is not yet in the game. Okay? So that means that white has got 22 points here, yeah, that are not playing. So you cannot, when you have so many soldiers, so many warriors, so many important pieces that are not in the game, that you go crazy and you start trying to attack. You cannot play chess like that. So that's why I'm saying white has to prepare his pieces first, get his pieces into positions. Black, on the other hand, wants to attack the pawn on D4. So we are expecting from black two possible moves. Black will play the move C5 or the move E5. What I mean by that is that black will plan these moves. It doesn't mean that black will have to play them now, but black will somehow make plans to play these moves, right? So this is now, once we see all of this, we immediately understand what is happening in the position. Once we've sorted out the issue of the strongest pawn, once we've sorted out where the breaks are going to be, we're happy. Now we go to the next level. What is the next level? Well, first we looked at the pawn, the strongest pawn. We looked at the breaks. Where will I break? Where will my opponent break? Then the next one is the most likely breaks. How do we see the most likely breaks? Well, the most likely breaks they are determined by the pieces behind the pawns. Okay? So now let us look at the pieces behind the pawns. The bishop is behind the pawn on e3. That's why e4 would be a likely break, so that the pieces can come out. For black, e5 is a very likely break, so that the bishop comes out. But c5 is also possible. b6, c5, also possible. For white, b4, bishop b2, also possible. So do you understand? So now let us see what white plays. So Littlewood plays the move b4. This is perfectly understandable move. There are two things that are at play here. The first one is the idea that he wants to prevent the move c5. But the second one is a slightly more advanced concept, and that concept is to create a weakness in the structure. It's called a structural attack. So what does that mean? What it means is that sometimes you look at the opponent's pawns that have moved. So here in this position, for an example, we see these three pawns that have moved. c6, d5, and e6. Well, g6 is not important because it's very far. And then we say to ourselves, since these pawns have moved, they sometimes give a chance for us to create a weakness. So here in this position, in the opponent's territory, that is, here in this position, white, there's a possibility for white to attack c6. Let me make this example. So I'm just going to move the black king backwards and forwards so that you just see one idea or the other. Let us say black plays, for an example, king h8, okay? And let us just say white plays c5, king there. First, let's put, I'm not playing the best moves by black, of course, not by far. I'm playing f4 to stop e5. All right. Now, e5 has been stopped. Now, next, I'm going to play a4 and b5. The main question is, what am I doing? Okay, let's put knight on f3 so that it coordinates nicely. The question is, what am I doing? The answer is very simple. If the opponent takes on b5, I will take back with a pawn. And now we see, first of all, the a7 pawn would be weakened. True? Well, weakened in the sense that I'm able to attack it easier. The second thing is that in some instances, I'm able to create a pass pawn, you see, by playing c6. And later on, I can create the pass pawn. And if black does not do this, but maybe plays the move king h8, then white is able to maybe take on c6. And notice what has happened. The pawn on c6 has all of a sudden become weak. And white can now start putting pressure on that weak pawn. So that is what is meant by a structural attack. So when Littlewood plays b4, it's part of those ideas. It's not a bad move. There are three ideas. One, to stop c5. Two, to maybe play bishop b2 so that the bishop can get into a position. And three, some possibility of advancing on the queen side and creating a weakness there. Okay, Smyslov immediately plays e5. He hits in the center because he's got a bishop on g7. Okay, Littlewood rightfully takes on d5. Smyslov takes, and knight takes, pawn takes. So they reach this position. It's an interesting, let's look at this position. It's a very interesting position because back, they both have weaknesses. White has got a weak pawn on d4, black has a weak pawn on d5. They both have both sets of bishops. But now in this position, we're starting to see now that b4 maybe is out of place. Because maybe b4 creates some weak squares behind, especially also the square c4 is also quite weak, you see. So yeah, maybe not the best plan by Littlewood to have captured everything, but okay. He plays bishop g5, f6, bishop f4. Smyslov has seen before that, of course, the opponent wants to coordinate on the square c7. He wants to play rook c1 and bishop c7 or rook c7. So obviously, he must be ready for that. knight b6, and then he plays the move rook f7. So the rook protects the 7th rank. Rook e1, bishop d7, b5. Yeah, this move I don't like too much because now there's a big difference. There's a big difference between pushing your pawns forward and creating a weakness in your opponent's structure, as we had seen in another fantasy variation, which we established was a structural attack. And there's another difference, another complete different scenario where you're just pushing your pawns, but you're not necessarily creating weaknesses in the opponent's structure. That is dangerous because it means that your pawns are becoming sitting ducks. You see, they're coming closer to the opponent's territory, and the opponent can then make plans to attack these pawns. Okay, so rook c8, queen b3, rook e7, rook takes, bishop takes, queen takes. So we reach this position. A lot of material has been exchanged, but it is to black's advantage. Why? Well, because of this pawn on b5. The pawn on b5 is in black's territory. And although it's not yet clear at the moment, but sooner or later, this pawn could be a problem. So Littlewood plays the move a4, another pawn coming closer, queen e6, king f1, bishop e8, queen b4, bishop f8, queen a5, attacks a7, knight c8, nothing is happening, bishop f4, b6, queen c3. This is the critical position that I want us to discuss. So Smyslov is slowly trying to outplay Littlewood, and they reach this position. So we said that both sides have got weaknesses on d4 and d5. And Smyslov immediately uses this principle that we have been talking about, which is to leave yourself a bad bishop, but a good defender of the pawn. So now, according to principles, we will see that for black, the white squared bishop is a bad bishop. This is a good bishop. True? Of course. For white, because white has got a pawn on the black square, this is a bad bishop and this is a good bishop. But look at Smyslov's next move, bishop d6. It's a very, very nice move, very powerful move. He allows himself to have a bad bishop. But remember what we said, that bishop is going to be a natural defender of the pawn on d5. And the pawn on d4, there's not going to be a natural defender. So Littlewood should probably have gone back here, bishop d2 and hold. But okay, he takes. This is probably a slight mistake. Good. So let's look at this position. And both sides improve their position ever so slightly. Now, Smyslov has got a winning plan here. So his first idea is to exchange queens. And the next idea, because of these pawns, remember we had talked about these pawns that had moved long ago. These two pawns here. These pawns are a problem for white. So Smyslov wants to exchange the queens and put the bishop on d7. And then put the king around here so that he can play the move a6. Once he plays the move a6, he will then be able to attack b5. If white takes here, he will take on a4, and oopsie, and this knight and that pawn on a6 will be so deep in black's territory that he will be able to just surround the pawn and take it. So this is his idea, and there's very little that Littlewood can do about this plan. So king d8, queen c7, bishop d7, and now a6. So he must take, and now bishop takes a4. So now a6 is weak. Knight b5, stopping the king from getting in. Knight f3, king b8, h4, king a7, h5 takes it. Bishop takes, knight c7, knight h4 takes the pawn. Knight g6, bishop back to defend h5, and this is the position I want us to look at around here. Look at this position there. Notice what is happening. Look at this bishop. It's an amazing positional game, because that piece that is the weak piece defends the weak pawn on d5, and nobody is defending the weak pawn on d4. Okay, the king, but the problem is knight b5 check is coming. So again, we see exactly what we are talking about, a natural defender. The bishop on c4 is a natural defender of the pawn on d5. The pawn on d4 has got no natural defender. This is the problem. So he takes here knight check, and knight takes d4. So now it's obviously lost. Obviously, you know, there's still some, he has to play subtly and make sure that, but this is a very nice maneuver to go around with the king. Check first, and now king g5. So yeah, he has to play knight g8, because if, for an example, I don't know, if he plays knight check, Smyslov plays king h6. And look at this. After, let's make another move. Let's play here. Why not? After I move like king g7, look at this bishop. The bishop is not moving. You see, the king is worth 4 points. It's holding 4 points, but now these points, I mean, all these pieces, it's like 8 points, are going to be playing against black's 7 points here. So, you know, he'll be able to queen one of these pawns, just pushing them and shepherding them with the pieces. So white is in big trouble. So that's why he plays knight g8 to stop king h6. Okay, knight f5, g7, and so yeah, here after move 66, bishop d5, the king took the pawn, and yeah, here white is already lost, but here of course black finds a very nice move, knight d7, so that he cannot take on b3, king c4 to defend the pawn, knight e5, and yeah, around here little would resign, because of course we can see that the pawns are going to come closer and the knight is going to shepherd the pawns, you know, d3, knight c4 check, and king c3, and so on and so on. So yeah, he resigned here. So this was a very powerful game, and it showed a very powerful technique that we can use. So now you start to realize that there is so much loaded information around the concept of bishops. And we've seen that, you know, in some instances, a bad bishop does not necessarily mean that one side is going to lose, because a bad piece can be a very good defender of a weak pawn, a very natural defender. So obviously, it's important to also understand these concepts. Yeah.